Milan Fashion Week, crystal chandeliers, 1,000 cameras capturing every moment, and in the front row, a pregnant woman about to discover that her fairy tale marriage was actually a death sentence. Isabella Chen Romano sat elegantly in the spotlight, 7 months pregnant, watching her billionaire husband Alessandro unveil his latest collection. The world saw a power couple at the pinnacle of success, but when his forgotten phone lit up beside her, everything shattered. Amore mio, I can't wait to see Isabella's face when you tell her about us. The messages revealed months of betrayal, photos of Alessandro with his stunning model Valentina, plans to steal Isabella's inheritance, but the worst was yet to come. As the fashion show reached its crescendo, Valentina appeared backstage with something deadly in her hands. "You think you're better than me?" she screamed, hurling a bottle of acid through the air. The liquid caught the lights like liquid diamonds. But this wasn't beauty. This was pure, searing destruction aimed at Isabella's face, an unborn child. Like if you believe in the power of justice over betrayal, subscribe for more incredible stories of survival and triumph. This is how a victim became a victor. The golden lights of Milan Fashion Week illuminated the Gran Lorenzo Conference Center like a constellation fallen to earth. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, where the world's elite gathered in their finest attire. The air thrummed with anticipation, expensive perfume, and the soft murmur of conversations in a dozen languages. Tonight was the night Alessandro Romano would unveil his autumn collection, a showcase that would either cement his legacy or shatter his empire. Isabella Chen Romano sat in the front row, her 7-month pregnant belly gracefully concealed beneath a flowing black silk gown that seemed to catch and hold the light like liquid shadow. At 28, she possessed the kind of timeless beauty that had once graced magazine covers across 3 continents. High cheekbones that could cut glass, almond-shaped eyes that sparkled with intelligence, and midnight black hair that cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall of silk. Even in her pregnancy, she radiated the poise and confidence of a woman who had conquered the fashion world before choosing love over career. Her manicured fingers traced gentle circles over her rounded belly as she watched the models glide down the runway like ethereal beings. Each piece they wore was a testament to her husband's genius, flowing fabrics that moved like poetry, cuts that challenged convention while honoring tradition, colors that seemed to have been stolen from Renaissance paintings. This was Alessandro's world, and by extension, it was hers. Alessandro Romano stood backstage, commanding the chaos with the authority of a general leading his troops into battle. At 35, he was the epitome of Italian masculine perfection, tall and lean with dark hair that fell just so across his forehead, olive skin that spoke of Mediterranean summers, and green eyes that could seduce or intimidate with equal effectiveness. His perfectly tailored midnight blue suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, fit him like it had been painted on his athletic frame. Romano Couture wasn't just a fashion house, it was an empire, with boutiques in Paris, New York, Tokyo, and Dubai. Alessandro had built something that transcended mere clothing. His designs were worn by Hollywood royalty, European aristocracy, and tech billionaires. The brand was worth nearly $200 million, and tonight's show would likely push it even higher. Their love story had been the stuff of fairy tales. Isabella, then a rising supermodel, had literally bumped into Alessandro at a cafe in Montmartre 5 years ago. Coffee had spilled, apologies had been exchanged, and by the end of that week, they were inseparable. Their wedding 2 years later at Lake Como had been featured in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and every major fashion publication on the planet. They lived like royalty in a penthouse overlooking the Seine, with weekend trips to their villa in Tuscany and holidays on their yacht in the Mediterranean. Isabella had left modeling to become Romano Couture's marketing director, using her connections and instincts to expand the brand's reach. They were the golden couple of fashion, beautiful, successful, and seemingly untouchable. But fairy tales, Isabella was about to learn, don't always have happy endings. As the show reached its crescendo, She felt a warm flutter in her belly. Their son they decided to name him Leonardo was active tonight, as if he could sense the electricity in the air. Isabella smiled, placing both hands protectively over her stomach. In 2 months, their family would be complete. Alessandro would be a father, and she would finally have the child she dreamed of since she was a little girl. The final model, a statuesque blonde with legs that seemed to go on forever, strutted down the runway in Alessandro's pièce de résistance, a wedding gown that looked like it had been woven from moonbeams and stardust. The crowd erupted in applause as Alessandro emerged from backstage, his smile radiant as he absorbed the adulation. But Isabella's attention was drawn to the model in the wedding dress. Valentina Rossi, 26 years old, devastatingly beautiful, and possessed of the kind of predatory grace that made other women instinctively step back. Her platinum blonde hair caught the lights like spun gold. Her ice blue eyes surveyed the crowd with calculating intelligence, and her perfectly sculpted lips curved in a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Valentina had joined Romano Couture 6 months ago, quickly becoming Alessandro's muse and the face of the brand. She had that rare combination of exotic beauty and commercial appeal that made photographers weep with joy. But there was something about her that made Isabella's skin crawl, a coldness beneath the perfect exterior, an ambition so naked it was almost obscene. As Alessandro took his bow, his eyes found Isabella's across the crowded runway. For a moment, the world fell away, and it was just the two of them, husband and wife, partners in life and business, soon to be parents. He blew her a kiss, and she felt her heart flutter the way it had that first day in Montmartre. But then his phone, forgotten on the seat beside her, lit up with a message notification. The preview was enough to stop her heart. Amore mio, after tonight's show, we'll finally be free to fly to Santorini as planned. I can't wait to become your wife. Isabella's blood turned to ice water in her veins. With trembling fingers, she picked up the phone. His passcode was Leonardo's due date, something she'd known since he'd said it months ago. Her world crumbled as she scrolled through message after message. The suite at the gritty palace in Venice was perfect. My love. Next time, let's stay a week. I can't wait to see Isabella's face when you tell her about us. She's gotten so fat with that pregnancy. How can you stand to touch her? After the baby is born, you need to divorce her immediately. I won't share you much longer. Each message was a dagger to her heart, but the photos were even worse. Alessandro and Valentina in Rome, their bodies intertwined on a terrace overlooking the Colosseum. The two of them in Venice, sharing a gondola ride that Isabella had thought was a business trip. Valentina wearing Isabella's jewelry pieces Alessandro had claimed were being cleaned. The timestamps told the story of a betrayal that had been building for months. While Isabella had been glowing with pregnancy, planning nurseries, and dreaming of their future family, her husband had been planning a future without her. The applause around her faded to white noise as Isabella sat frozen in her seat. Alessandro's phone clutched in her hands like evidence of her own execution. The fairy tale was over. The prince had chosen another princess. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the crowd began to disperse toward the after-party area. Isabella remained seated, watching as guests mingled with champagne and canapes, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just collapsed. Isabella, darling. Alessandro's voice cut through her fog of devastation as he approached, arms outstretched and face glowing with post-show euphoria. What did you think? The crowd loved it, didn't they? She looked up at him, this man she'd loved, trusted, and built a life with, and saw a stranger. Your phone, she said quietly, holding it out to him. You have messages. His face paled as he realized what had happened, but instead of shame or remorse, irritation flashed in his green eyes. Isabella, you had no right to look at my private messages. Private messages. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a scream. Your pregnant wife doesn't have the right to see messages about your affair. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing around nervously. People are watching. Let them watch, Isabella said, struggling to her feet. At 7 months pregnant, the simple act of standing had become an effort, and she felt momentarily dizzy. Let them see what kind of man Alessandro Romano really is. You're being hysterical, he said coldly. This is exactly why. Why what? She interrupted. Why you've been sleeping with your model while your wife carries your child. Why you've been planning to leave me. Tell me, Alessandro, what exactly justifies this? His mask slipped completely, and for the first time, she saw the real man beneath the charming exterior. You want the truth. Isabella Fine, you're not the woman I married anymore. You've gotten boring, predictable. Pregnancy has made you soft, weak. Valentina is everything you used to be: exciting, dangerous, alive. The words hit her like physical blows, but she forced herself to remain standing. I see. And what about your son? What about Leonardo? The baby will be fine. We'll arrange something. His casual dismissal of their unborn child was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. Isabella felt something harden inside her chest, not break, but crystallize into something sharp and unbreakable. You're right about one thing. Alessandro, I'm not the woman you married, but not for the reasons you think. Before he could respond, Valentina appeared at his side like a beautiful serpent. She changed out of the wedding gown into a slinky red dress that left little to the imagination. Her arm slipped possessively through Alessandro's, and she smiled at Isabella with venomous sweetness. Isabella, she purred in her sultry Italian accent. Congratulations on the pregnancy. You look full. The insult was delivered with such apparent sincerity that for a moment, Isabella almost doubted she'd heard it correctly. But the malicious glint in Valentina's ice-blue eyes confirmed what her ears had registered. Thank you, Isabella replied evenly. And congratulations to you too, Valentina. Alessandro tells me you're quite versatile. Valentina's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Oh, you have no idea. I can do things you never could, even before you became a cow. The crowd around them had gone silent, sensing the electricity in the air. Cell phones were being discreetly raised as the fashion world's elite prepared to witness what promised to be an epic confrontation. Alessandro, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to intervene. Both of you, stop this. We're making a scene. No, Valentina said, her voice rising. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of watching this fat, useless woman parade around like she owns you. She's nothing. Alessandro, nothing. Isabella remained calm, her hands protectively cradling her belly. You're right, Valentina. I am nothing to you, but I'm everything to the child I'm carrying. And unlike some people, I don't need to steal another woman's husband to feel worthy. That was the spark that lit the fire. Valentina's beautiful face contorted with rage, and Isabella saw her reach into her purse. Time seemed to slow as Valentina's hand emerged holding a small glass bottle filled with clear liquid. Isabella's mind registered the danger even as her body, weighted down by pregnancy, couldn't react fast enough. You think you're better than me? Valentina screamed. Let's see how beautiful you are after this. The bottle flew through the air in a perfect arc, its contents catching the light like liquid diamonds. Isabella tried to turn away, tried to protect her face and belly, but the acid found its mark. The liquid splashed across her left shoulder, arm, and neck, immediately beginning its terrible work. The pain was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced, a burning, searing agony that felt like being consumed by hellfire. She screamed, a sound of pure anguish that cut through the stunned silence of the crowd. She fell to her knees, one hand clutching her burning shoulder, while the other protectively covered her belly. The smell of burning fabric and flesh filled the air as the acid ate through her expensive dress and into her skin. Around her, the crowd erupted into chaos, screams, shouts, the sound of people running in every direction. But Isabella was aware of none of it. Her world had narrowed to the blazing pain and the desperate need to protect her unborn child. Through her agony, she heard Alessandro's voice, but not the words she expected, not concern for her welfare or fury at her attacker. Instead, she heard him say, "Valentina, what have you done?" We talked about being subtle, even through her pain. Those words hit Isabella like a second dose of acid. He had known. He had been part of this. As consciousness began to fade at the edges, Isabella felt strong hands lifting her. Not Alessandro's hands, he was still standing with Valentina, looking around nervously as if concerned only about the scandal. These were the hands of strangers, of good Samaritans who had rushed to help when her own husband had failed her. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted in accented English. "She needs medical attention now." "The baby," Isabella whispered through gritted teeth. "Please, save my baby." As she was carefully placed on a makeshift stretcher created from chairs and tablecloths, Isabella caught one last glimpse of Alessandro and Valentina. They were embracing, whispering urgently to each other, already planning their next move. Valentina's face showed no remorse, only satisfaction at a job well done. But Isabella also saw something else, something that would prove crucial in the coming months. Pierre Dubois, a freelance photographer who had covered hundreds of fashion shows, stood in the shadows with his camera, his face pale with shock, but his finger still on the shutter. He had captured everything. As the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance and Isabella was rushed toward medical care, one thought burned in her mind brighter than the acid on her skin. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The fairy tale was dead, but the story of Isabella Chen Romano was just beginning. The sterile white walls of the Ospedale San Raffaele seemed to close in around Isabella as she lay in the burn unit, her left shoulder and arm wrapped in layers of gauze and medical tape. The morphine drip provided blessed relief from the physical agony, but it did nothing to numb the deeper wounds to her heart and soul. For 3 weeks, she drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening bringing fresh waves of betrayal and disbelief. The media had had a field day with the story. "Fashion Week acid attack shocks Milan," screamed the headlines. "Pregnant model burned by rival." But the narrative being spun wasn't the truth Isabella knew. Somehow, impossibly, the story emerging in the press painted her as the aggressor and unstable, jealous wife who had attacked Valentina first, only to have the acid thrown in self-defense. Alessandro's statement to the police and media was a masterpiece of manipulation. "My wife has been struggling with depression and paranoia since her pregnancy began. She became convinced that Valentina was trying to steal her place in the company. When she confronted Valentina backstage, she became violent. Valentina was simply defending herself." It was a lie so audacious, so perfectly crafted, that even Isabella found herself wondering if she was losing her mind. Had she imagined the text messages? Had she dreamed the months of betrayal? The medical staff treated her with professional courtesy, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. Who was she? After all, just another unstable pregnant woman who had let jealousy drive her to violence. The plastic surgeons assured her that the scarring would be minimal with proper treatment, but Isabella knew that wasn't the point. The acid hadn't just burned her skin, it had burned away every illusion she'd held about her life, her marriage, and her place in the world. On her second day in the hospital, she received a visit from a lawyer representing Alessandro. The man was thin and pale, with the kind of smile that suggested he collected souls for a living. He informed her that divorce proceedings had already been initiated, that she was being sued for assault, and that her access to all joint accounts had been frozen pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. "Mr. Romano is prepared to be generous," the lawyer said in a tone that suggested generosity was a foreign concept to him. "A small settlement, supervised visitation with the child once it's born, and a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, you admit to the assault and agree not to contest the divorce?" Isabella, despite the medications clouding her thoughts, managed to give him a look that could have melted steel. "Get out," she said quietly, "and tell Alessandro that if he thinks I'm going to disappear quietly, he's about to learn just how wrong he can be." The lawyer shrugged and left, but not before placing a stack of legal documents on her bedside table. You have 48 hours to consider the offer. After that, things will become unpleasant. That night, alone in her hospital room with only the soft beeping of monitors for company, Isabella stared out the window at the lights of Milan and felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, absolute crystalline clarity about who she was and what she needed to do. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman who had been underestimated, betrayed, and written off. But she was also a woman with resources, connections, and a burning desire for justice that was stronger than any pain medication could ever be. The next morning, she made her first phone call. "Marcus," she said when her brother answered on the second ring, "I need your help." Marcus Chen was everything Alessandro wasn't: honest, loyal, and possessed of a moral compass that pointed unwaveringly toward justice. As one of New York's most successful civil rights attorneys, he had built his reputation on taking cases that others considered unwinnable and turning them into landmark victories. He also happened to love his little sister more than life itself. "Isabella," his voice was tight with controlled fury, "I've been following the news coverage. I'm already on a plane." Within 24 hours, Marcus was at her bedside, his dark eyes blazing with the kind of righteous anger that had made him legendary in courtrooms across America. At 42, he was distinguished and silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made opposing counsel nervous and juries attentive. "Tell me everything," he said simply, taking out a digital recorder. "Leave nothing out." For the next 4 hours, Isabella recounted every detail of her marriage, the growing distance with Alessandro, the discovery of the affair, and the attack at the fashion show. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, not a pleasant expression, but one that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Alessandro and his pet model have made a critical error," he said. "They've underestimated you. More importantly, they've underestimated what happens when someone hurts my family." Marcus's first move was to hire Sophie Laurent, a private investigator whose reputation in European high society was legendary. Sophie was 45, elegant, and possessed of the kind of connections that money couldn't buy. She had cut her teeth investigating insurance fraud for Lloyd's of London before striking out on her own, specializing in cases involving the wealthy and powerful. "The beautiful people think they're untouchable," Sophie explained to Isabella during their first meeting in the hospital. "They believe money and influence can rewrite any narrative. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes they leave enough breadcrumbs for someone who knows where to look." Sophie's investigation began with the most obvious lead, Pierre Dubois, the photographer who had been at the fashion show. When Sophie tracked him down at his studio in the Marais district, she found a man consumed by guilt and fear. "I saw everything," he admitted, his hands shaking as he poured himself his third espresso of the morning. "The whole attack, Alessandro's reaction, everything. I have it all on film." "Then why haven't you come forward?" Sophie asked. Pierre laughed bitterly. "You think I haven't tried? Alessandro's people offered me 50,000 euros to disappear. When I refused, they offered 100,000. When I still refused, they started making threats. My gallery bookings were mysteriously canceled. My equipment was vandalized. The message was clear: shut up or suffer." Sophie studied the anxious photographer with calculating eyes. "What if I told you there was a way to do the right thing and stay safe? I'd say you're either naive or lying, or I'm very good at my job." Sophie replied with a smile that was all teeth. "Let me see the footage." What Pierre showed her was devastating. The entire attack had been captured in the high-definition detail, from Valentina retrieving the acid from her purse to Alessandro's damning words afterward. But more than that, Pierre had been filming backstage for the past 6 months, documenting the behind-the-scenes drama of Romano Couture. His footage showed Alessandro and Valentina's affair in explicit detail, their discussions about removing Isabella, and most damning of all, their planning sessions for what they euphemistically called the accident, This is conspiracy to commit assault, Sophie breathed, reviewing the footage. With this evidence, we can destroy them both. But Pierre wasn't Sophie's only source. Her investigation revealed a web of corruption and deception that went far deeper than a simple affair. Alessandro had been embezzling money from Romano Couture for months, funneling company funds into secret accounts shared with Valentina. He had forged Isabella's signature on documents transferring her shares in the company to him. He had even hired a doctor to provide false medical reports about Isabella's supposed mental instability. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Valentina's pregnancy, the one she had been using to pressure Alessandro into leaving Isabella, was completely fake. Sophie's contacts in the medical community revealed that Valentina had never been pregnant, had never even been to a gynecologist. The ultrasound images she had shown Alessandro were stolen from the internet. She's been playing him like a violin, Sophie reported to Marcus and Isabella during a strategy session in Marcus's hotel suite. The pregnancy, the threats of suicide if he didn't leave you. Even the acid attack, it was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to take over Romano Couture. Isabella, now out of the hospital and staying in a modest hotel while her legal team built their case, listened to the revelations with growing amazement. But why go to such lengths? Because Romano Couture is worth $200 million, Marcus answered grimly. And because Alessandro, for all his artistic talent, is fundamentally weak. He was the perfect mark for someone like Valentina, successful, susceptible to flattery, and convinced that his charm could solve any problem. As the evidence mounted, Isabella found her strength returning. The physical therapy for her injured arm was painful, but she threw herself into it with the determination of a woman who had found her purpose. She was going to not only survive this betrayal, she was going to thrive. The breakthrough came when Sophie made contact with Dr. Elena Martinez, the physician who had been treating Valentina for pregnancy complications. Dr. Martinez was a respected gynecologist with 30 years of experience, but she was also a woman tortured by guilt. I knew something was wrong from the first appointment, Dr. Martinez confessed during a clandestine meeting in a small cafe near Notre Dame. Valentina's symptoms were inconsistent. Her hormone levels were normal, and she refused to undergo certain standard tests. But she was paying cash, substantial amounts, and she implied that there would be consequences if I didn't provide the documentation she needed. What kind of consequences? Sophie asked. Dr. Martinez's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette. My daughter is studying at the Sorbonne. Valentina showed me photographs of her walking to class, going to the library, meeting friends. The message was clear: play along, or something might happen to my child. Will you testify to this? Sophie pressed. If you can guarantee my daughter's safety. Yes, I've been carrying this guilt for months. That poor woman, Isabella, she deserves the truth. With Dr. Martinez's testimony, the case against Alessandro and Valentina became airtight, but Marcus wasn't content with simply proving their innocence. He wanted justice, and justice meant making sure that Alessandro and Valentina paid for every moment of suffering they had caused his sister. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source: Alessandro himself. In his arrogance, he had been secretly recording his conversations with Valentina, apparently planning to use them as insurance in case she ever tried to betray him. When Sophie's computer expert, a former NSA programmer who now worked private security, hacked into Alessandro's personal cloud storage, they found hours of incriminating audio. In one particularly damaging recording, Alessandro and Valentina discussed their plans with chilling casualness. After the baby is born, we need Isabella gone. Valentina's voice was clear and cold. Permanently. What are you suggesting? Alessandro asked. An accident. Car brakes fail. She falls downstairs. Food poisoning from shellfish. There are many ways for a new mother to die tragically. And the baby will be raised by his loving father and stepmother. Of course, the poor little orphan. Isabella listened to this recording in Marcus's hotel suite, her son born healthy despite everything, sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had named him Leonardo, as planned, but his middle name was Justice. "They were planning to kill me," she said quietly. "Not just destroy my life, but actually murder me." "Yes," Marcus replied grimly. "Which means we're not just dealing with assault and fraud anymore. We're dealing with conspiracy to commit murder." As Isabella looked down at her son's innocent face, she felt the last vestiges of doubt or mercy drain away. Alessandro and Valentina had chosen their path. Now she would choose hers. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 months after the attack. Isabella spent those months rebuilding herself physically, emotionally, and financially. Marcus had frozen Alessandro's assets pending the criminal investigation, which meant that Isabella, as his legal wife and business partner, regained access to the accounts he had tried to steal from her. She used the money wisely, hiring the best legal team money could buy and launching a media campaign to tell her side of the story. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. The unstable pregnant wife became the brave victim fighting for justice. The self-defending model became the calculating sociopath who nearly killed an innocent woman. But Isabella's greatest weapon wasn't money or media manipulation. It was patience. She let Alessandro and Valentina believe they were winning. She let them think their lies had been believed, their false evidence accepted. She watched as they celebrated their apparent victory, moving in together, taking romantic trips funded by money stolen from her company, planning their future as the new power couple of Italian fashion. All the while, she was gathering her strength for the moment when she would strip away their delusions and show the world exactly who they really were. That moment was coming soon, very soon. The trial would begin in 2 weeks, and Isabella Chen Romano was ready for war. The Palais de Justice in Paris stood like a monument to human judgment, its neoclassical columns and imposing facade bearing witness to centuries of legal drama. On this crisp October morning, the courthouse was surrounded by an army of media personnel. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters delivered breathless updates in a dozen languages, and photographers jostled for position behind police barriers. The trial of Alessandro Romano and Valentina Rossi had captured international attention, not just for its salacious details, but for what it represented: a reckoning between power and truth, privilege and justice. Isabella Chen Romano emerged from a black sedan with the poise of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged as steel. Her navy blue Chanel suit was impeccably tailored, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her bearing radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to fear. The scars on her neck and shoulder were barely visible. Expert surgery and careful makeup had seen to that, but more importantly, they no longer defined her. In her arms, she carried 8-month-old Leonardo, a cherubic baby with his mother's dark eyes and a smile that had already charmed everyone, from court clerks to hardened bailiffs. His presence wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. The jury would see not just a victim, but a mother protecting her child from the people who had tried to destroy their family. As Isabella walked up the courthouse steps, flanked by Marcus and her legal team, reporters shouted questions in multiple languages. "Mrs. Romano, how do you feel about facing your attackers? What do you hope to achieve with this trial? Do you forgive your husband?" Isabella paused at the top of the steps, turned to face the cameras, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Today isn't about forgiveness or revenge. It's about truth. And the truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to surface." Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow viewing areas set up to accommodate the international media attention. In the defendant's section, Alessandro sat rigidly in an expensive gray suit, his olive complexion pale and his green eyes darting nervously around the room. Beside him, Valentina wore a demure black dress and minimal makeup, her legal team's attempt to make her appear sympathetic and harmless. The presiding judge, Marie-Claire Dubois, no relation to the photographer, was a stern woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense approach to high-profile cases. She had earned her reputation handling corruption cases involving politicians and business leaders, and her penetrating gaze suggested she had little patience for theatrics or manipulation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "You are here to determine the truth in a case that has captured international attention. But I want you to put aside everything you've read in the press, everything you've heard in gossip, and focus solely on the evidence presented to you. Justice is not a popularity contest. It is a careful weighing of facts." The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Maître Jean-Baptiste Moreau, one of France's most respected criminal prosecutors. His silver hair and gravelly voice commanded immediate attention as he outlined the case against the defendants. "Members of the jury, what you will see over the next few days is not just a story of betrayal and violence, but of careful, calculated cruelty. The defendants didn't just destroy a marriage, they orchestrated a campaign of psychological terror designed to drive Isabella Chen Romano to madness or death. When that failed, they resorted to physical violence that could have killed both Mrs. Romano and her unborn child." Moreau's presentation was methodical and devastating. He walked the jury through the timeline of the affair, the financial fraud, the forged documents, and the fake pregnancy. He showed them photographs of Isabella's injuries, medical reports detailing the extent of the acid burns, and psychological evaluations documenting the trauma she had endured. But it was the defense's opening statement that truly revealed the audacity of Alessandro and Valentina's legal strategy. Their attorney, Maître Claude Berthier, a slick, expensive lawyer known for representing wealthy criminals, painted a picture of his clients as the real victims. "Ladies and gentlemen, what the prosecution wants you to believe is a fantasy created by a woman scorned. Isabella Chen Romano is not the innocent victim she pretends to be. She is a calculating individual who discovered her husband's affair and planned an elaborate revenge that has cost my clients their reputations, their livelihoods, and their freedom." Berthier's narrative was bold. Isabella had attacked Valentina first. The acid throwing was self-defense, and all the evidence of the affair and conspiracy had been fabricated or taken out of context. It was a desperate strategy, but one that might work if the jury could be convinced that Isabella was capable of such elaborate deception. The first week of testimony established the basic facts of the case. Medical experts described Isabella's injuries. Financial analysts detailed the embezzlement scheme, and character witnesses painted pictures of the principles that slowly demolished the defense's narrative. But it was in the second week that the trial took its dramatic turn. Pierre Dubois took the stand on a Tuesday morning, his hands shaking slightly as he was sworn in. The photographer had aged years in the months since the attack, his hair now showing gray at the temples and lines of stress etched around his eyes. But his testimony was clear and devastating. "I was positioned behind the main stage, photographing the after-party interactions for a retrospective piece on Milan Fashion Week," he began. "I had been filming backstage interactions for several months as part of a documentary project on the fashion industry." Moreau led him through his testimony carefully, establishing his credibility and the chain of custody for his video evidence. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Mr. Dubois, I'm going to show you Prosecution Exhibit 47A. Can you tell the court what this is? This is video footage I captured of the assault on Mrs. Romano." The courtroom fell silent as the large screen showed high-definition footage of the attack. There was no sound, but the images were clear and damning. They showed Valentina deliberately retrieving the acid from her purse, Isabella's shocked reaction to discovering the affair, and most importantly, Alessandro's words and actions after the attack. The jury watched in stunned silence as the video showed Alessandro embracing Valentina immediately after the attack, appearing to comfort her while his wife writhed in agony on the floor. Audio enhancement technology allowed the court to hear his words, "Bene fatto, amore mio, ora siamo liberi." "Well done, my love. Now we are free." But Pierre had more than just the attack footage. He presented months of backstage video showing Alessandro and Valentina's affair, their planning sessions, and their discussions about dealing with the Isabella problem. The evidence was so comprehensive, so damning, that even Berthier seemed shaken. "Doctor, Elena Martinez's testimony came next, and it was perhaps even more devastating than Pierre's video evidence. The respected gynecologist's voice trembled as she described Valentina's elaborate pregnancy deception. In 30 years of practice, I have never encountered a case of such deliberate medical fraud, she testified. Ms. Rossi presented false urine samples, wore prosthetic bellies, and even hired an actress to impersonate her at one ultrasound appointment when she was out of the country with Mr. Romano. Under cross-examination, Berthier tried to suggest that Dr. Martinez was lying to cover up her own malpractice. But the doctor's testimony was supported by hospital records, security footage, and the testimony of her nursing staff. Sophie Laurent's investigation had been thorough, and each day brought new revelations. Bank records showed that Alessandro had been systematically looting Romano Couture's accounts. Email forensics revealed hundreds of messages between the defendants discussing their plans to eliminate Isabella. Phone records showed that Valentina had been in contact with known criminals, apparently seeking someone willing to arrange an accident for Isabella after the baby was born. As the evidence mounted, Alessandro's composure began to crack. His expensive suits couldn't hide the fact that he was sweating constantly. His hands shook when he thought no one was looking, and his eyes had developed the haunted look of a man watching his world collapse in real time. Valentina, by contrast, remained coldly composed throughout most of the trial. She sat ramrod straight, her beautiful face a mask of innocence, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief when she thought the jury was watching. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, but it was about to be shattered. The prosecution's final witness was Isabella herself. When she took the stand on the Friday of the second week, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Isabella wore a simple black dress, minimal jewelry, and no makeup to hide the faint scars on her neck and shoulder. She carried herself with quiet dignity as she placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Moreau's direct examination was masterful, allowing Isabella to tell her story in her own words. She spoke of her love for Alessandro, her excitement about their pregnancy, her devastation at discovering the affair, and her terror during the acid attack. Her voice never wavered, never broke, never betrayed the slightest hint of the rage or desire for revenge that the defense had claimed motivated her. Mrs. Romano, Moreau asked gently, what was going through your mind when you realized what was in that bottle? I thought about my baby, Isabella replied simply. My only thought was protecting Leonardo. I didn't care what happened to me, but I couldn't let anything happen to him. And what do you hope to achieve with this trial? Isabella paused, looking directly at the jury. I want the truth to be known. Not for me, I've moved past what happened to me, but because if these people can do this to someone like me, with resources and family support, imagine what they could do to someone with no voice, no protection. No one should have to endure what I endured. The cross-examination was brutal. Berthier attacked Isabella's character, her motivations, her memory of events. He suggested she was a gold digger who had trapped Alessandro with an unwanted pregnancy, a manipulative woman who had orchestrated the entire scenario for financial gain. Isabella absorbed every attack with quiet strength, answering each question truthfully and directly. When Berthier accused her of fabricating evidence, she calmly referred him to the independent forensic analysis. When he suggested she had attacked Valentina first, she pointed to the video evidence that clearly showed otherwise. But it was Berthier's final question that provided the most memorable moment of the trial. Mrs. Romano, if you could say anything to my clients right now, what would it be? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, looking at Alessandro and Valentina for the first time since the trial began. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. I would tell them that I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because carrying hatred is a burden I choose not to bear. I would tell them that they destroyed something beautiful, but in doing so, they freed me to become something stronger. And I would tell them that while they were planning my destruction, I was growing a human being who will know love, truth, and justice, things they clearly never learned themselves. The courtroom was silent for a moment before the judge called for a recess. But the trial's most shocking moment was yet to come. On Monday morning of the third week, as the defense prepared to present its case, Alessandro suddenly stood up in the middle of Berthier's opening statement. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I need to speak." Berthier tried to pull him back into his seat, but Alessandro shook him off. "No, basta, enough. I cannot listen to more lies." Judge Dubois gavelled for order as the courtroom erupted in murmurs. "Mr. Romano, please sit down and allow your attorney to represent you." "No, Your Honor. I dismiss my attorney. I want to represent myself, and I want to change my plea." The judge's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Mr. Romano, I strongly advise against—" "I plead guilty," Alessandro said, his voice growing stronger. "To all charges, guilty." The courtroom exploded. Reporters frantically typed on their phones. The jury looked stunned, and Valentina stared at Alessandro with undisguised fury. "Alessandro," she hissed, "what are you doing?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time since the trial began, his expression was clear and resolute. "I'm telling the truth, Valentina." "Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you," Judge Dubois gavelled furiously for order. "Mr. Romano, are you certain you want to proceed without counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor, and I want to testify against my co-defendant." Valentina's composure finally cracked. "You bastard," she screamed, lunging toward Alessandro before bailiffs restrained her. "You promised you said you'd protect me." "I said a lot of things," Alessandro replied quietly. "Most of them lies." What followed was perhaps the most dramatic testimony in French legal history. Alessandro, speaking directly to the jury without notes or prepared statements, confessed to everything: the affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy to drive Isabella to madness, and most damning of all, the plan to murder her after the baby was born. "Valentina told me it would be easy," he said, his voice hollow with shame. "A new mother, postpartum depression, access to the roof of our penthouse. She said no one would question a suicide." "And you agreed to this?" Moreau asked incredulously. Alessandro's shoulders sagged. "I was weak, stupid, blinded by lust and flattered by the attention of a younger woman. Valentina made me believe that Isabella was holding me back, that our marriage was a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. She convinced me that Isabella didn't really love me, that she was only interested in my money." "But you must have known your wife was pregnant with your child." "Yes," Alessandro's voice broke. "And that's the part I'll never forgive myself for. I knew Isabella was carrying my son, and I still chose Valentina. I told myself the baby would be better off without a mother who was mentally unstable. That's how Valentina described it. She said we were doing the child a favor." The jury looked horrified as Alessandro continued his confession. He detailed how Valentina had manipulated him, how she had faked her pregnancy to force his hand, how she had threatened to kill herself if he didn't leave Isabella. He described the planning of the acid attack, initially conceived as a way to disfigure Isabella so badly that she would be unmarketable as a model and would voluntarily disappear from their lives. But when that didn't work fast enough for Valentina, she escalated. Alessandro continued. "She said Isabella was like a cancer that needed to be cut out. That was her exact phrase, cut out." Throughout Alessandro's testimony, Valentina sat rigid with fury, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and hate-filled. When he finished, she demanded the right to cross-examine him herself, having fired her own attorney in a fit of rage. The cross-examination was a disaster for the defense. Valentina's questions revealed more about her guilt than Alessandro's testimony had. She tried to paint herself as the victim of Alessandro's manipulation, but her intimate knowledge of details she claimed to know nothing about betrayed her completely. "You're lying," she finally screamed at Alessandro. "I never said to kill her. I said we needed her gone. But I didn't mean dead." "Then what did you mean when you bought the ricin?" Alessandro asked quietly. The courtroom fell silent. This was the first mention of ricin, a deadly poison that had not been part of the prosecution's case. Valentina's face went white. That was..." You're twisting everything. Moreau was on his feet instantly. Your Honor, the prosecution requests an immediate recess to investigate this new evidence. But Valentina was beyond caring about legal strategy now. Her careful facade had crumbled completely, and the real woman beneath, calculating, vicious, and utterly without remorse, was finally visible. Yes, I bought Ryson, she shrieked. Because she deserved to die. She was nothing. A washed-up model who got lucky and trapped a man above her station. I am younger, more beautiful, more talented. I deserved to be Mrs. Romano. I deserved Romano. Couture. She was in my way. The bailiffs moved to restrain her as she continued her rant, but she shook them off, turning her fury on the jury. You think you're so righteous, sitting there judging me? I gave Alessandro everything. I made him feel alive again. And that cow, that pregnant cow, she would have drained the life out of him. I saved him. By trying to murder his wife, Judge Dubois asked with icy calm. By doing what needed to be done, Valentina snarled. And I'd do it again. She deserved worse than acid. She deserved to burn. The courtroom was in chaos, but through it all, Isabella sat perfectly still, holding Leonardo close to her chest. She watched the woman who had tried to destroy her with something approaching pity. It took 20 minutes for order to be restored. When it was, Valentina had been sedated and removed from the courtroom. Alessandro sat with his head in his hands, finally understanding the true nature of the woman he had betrayed his family for. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Valentina, when she was brought back for sentencing, had been charged with additional counts based on her courtroom confession. She received 25 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and terrorist threats. Alessandro, whose cooperation had been noted by the court, received 10 years for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to assault. But the criminal penalties were just the beginning. In the civil trial that followed, Isabella was awarded complete ownership of Romano Couture, the penthouse in Paris, the villa in Tuscany, the yacht, and damages totaling 50 million euros. Alessandro's assets were liquidated to pay the judgment, leaving him with nothing but his debt to society. As the judge read the final verdict, Isabella felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the truth had been revealed. She had not sought revenge, she had sought vindication, and she had found it. Outside the courthouse, as Isabella faced the media for the final time, a reporter asked her what she planned to do next. Isabella looked down at Leonardo, who was reaching for the autumn sunlight filtering through the trees, and smiled. I'm going to build something beautiful, she said simply. Something worthy of my son. The nightmare was over. The real story of Isabella Chen was about to begin. 2 years after the trial that captivated the world, Isabella Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 47th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, watching the sun paint the Hudson River gold. The city sprawled beneath her like a glittering promise, and she had claimed her place in it through determination, brilliance, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. The nameplate on her door read, Isabella Chen, CEO, but the company name had changed from Romano Couture to simply Chen. The rebranding hadn't just been cosmetic, it had been transformational. Under Isabella's leadership, the fashion house had evolved from a traditional luxury brand into a global empire that encompassed fashion, beauty, lifestyle, and social impact. Leonardo, now a precocious 3-year-old with his mother's intelligence and an infectious laugh, played quietly in the corner of the office with his collection of toy cars. Every few minutes, he would look up and call out, Mama, just to make sure she was still there. Isabella would turn from whatever she was doing, reviewing designs, analyzing market reports, or strategizing with her team, and smile at him with such pure love that everyone in the room understood what had driven her transformation. The numbers told an incredible story. In just 2 years, Chen had grown from a company valued at 200 million euros to a global conglomerate worth over $1 billion. Isabella had achieved this through a combination of strategic vision, innovative marketing, and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate consumer trends. The Phoenix Rising collection that launched 6 months after the trial had become legendary in fashion circles. Inspired by Isabella's own journey from victim to victor, the line featured clothing designed for women who refused to be diminished by life's challenges. Each piece told a story of resilience, fabrics that looked delicate but were actually incredibly strong, cuts that flattered every body type, colors that shifted and changed in different lights like the human spirit itself. But Isabella hadn't stopped with fashion. The Chen Foundation, established with 20% of the company's profits, had become one of the world's leading organizations, supporting survivors of domestic violence and acid attacks. Isabella had personally funded medical treatment for over 500 women across the globe, established safe houses in 15 countries, and lobbied for stronger laws protecting victims of gender-based violence. Her book, From Ashes to Crown: A Mother's Journey, had spent 78 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and had been translated into 34 languages. The audiobook, narrated by Isabella herself, had won a Grammy for Best Spoken Word Album. More importantly, the book had inspired thousands of women to leave abusive situations, pursue their dreams, and refuse to accept limitations placed on them by others. Isabella had become one of the most sought-after speakers in the world, commanding six-figure fees for appearances at corporate events, women's conferences, and university graduations. Her TED Talk, The Mathematics of Resilience, had been viewed over 50 million times and had spawned academic studies on the psychological factors that enable some people to not just survive trauma, but transform it into strength. The personal transformation was as remarkable as the professional one. Isabella moved through the world now with the confidence of someone who had looked evil in the face and refused to blink. The acid scars on her shoulder and neck had faded to thin silver lines that she no longer bothered to hide. When asked about them in interviews, she would say simply, "They're reminders that I survived. Not everyone who tries to destroy you succeeds." Her romantic life had also found new happiness. Dr. James Mitchell, the plastic surgeon who had helped repair her physical scars, had gradually become someone who helped heal her emotional ones as well. Their courtship had been slow and careful. Isabella had been understandably cautious about trusting another man with her heart, but James had proven himself to be everything Alessandro wasn't: patient, honest, and utterly devoted to both Isabella and Leonardo. Their wedding, a small ceremony on a beach in Santorini, the same destination Alessandro and Valentina had planned to visit, had been covered exclusively by Vogue. But the focus of the article hadn't been on the dress, though Isabella's own design was breathtaking, or the celebrity guests, though they were numerous. Instead, the piece highlighted the family they had created: Isabella, James, and Leonardo, who had asked if he could call James Papa during the ceremony, reducing half the wedding party to tears. James had formally adopted Leonardo 6 months after the wedding, and the boy now carried the hyphenated name Mitchell Chen. Alessandro, through his prison attorneys, had signed away all parental rights without contest, whether this was from shame, genuine remorse, or simply a desire to avoid further legal complications. No one knew. Isabella had made it clear that she had no interest in his motivations. The fashion world had not just forgiven Isabella for the chaos surrounding Romano couture, they had embraced her as a symbol of innovation and authenticity. Chen's shows at Fashion Week were invariably the hottest tickets, not just because of the clothes, but because of the stories they told. Isabella had pioneered the concept of narrative fashion, where each collection explored themes of human experience, resilience, love, loss, hope, transformation. The most recent collection, Metamorphosis, featured pieces that literally changed throughout the day, dresses that shifted color with body temperature, suits with hidden panels that revealed new silhouettes, accessories that transformed from casual to formal with simple adjustments. The show had been held in a converted butterfly conservatory, with models walking among thousands of chrysalises, some of which opened during the show to release monarch butterflies. The imagery was obvious, but powerful, beautiful things could emerge from even the most constraining circumstances. But perhaps Isabella's greatest achievement was the impact she had on other women. The Chen Foundation had established a mentorship network connecting successful women with those struggling to escape difficult situations. Isabella personally mentored 12 women at any given time, providing not just financial support, but emotional guidance and professional opportunities. One of her mentees, Maria Santos, had been disfigured in an acid attack by her ex-husband in Guatemala. With Isabella's support, Maria had not only received reconstructive surgery, but had also trained as a social worker and now ran the Chen Foundation's Central American operations. At the Foundation's annual gala, Maria had introduced Isabella as the woman who taught me that scars are just proof that you're stronger than whatever tried to hurt you. The gala itself had become one of New York's most important social events, raising over $20 million annually. But Isabella had insisted that it be more than just a fundraiser for wealthy people to feel good about themselves. Each year, half the attendees were survivors, women who had overcome violence, poverty, discrimination, or other challenges to build meaningful lives. The event celebrated not just charitable giving, but human resilience in all its forms. Isabella's media presence was carefully managed but impactful. She appeared on the covers of Time, Forbes, and Vanity Fair, but she also made time for smaller publications and podcasts that focused on social issues. Her Instagram account, with over 15 million followers, was a masterclass in authentic storytelling. She shared glimpses of her work, her travels, and her life with Leonardo and James. But she also used the platform to highlight the stories of other survivors and to advocate for policy changes. The professional accolades had poured in steadily. Isabella had been named to Forbes' 50 Most Powerful Women list 3 years running. She had received honorary doctorates from Columbia, Harvard, and the Sorbonne. The United Nations had appointed her as a special envoy for women's rights, and she had addressed the General Assembly on the economic impact of gender-based violence. But for all her public success, Isabella's private moments remained focused on the simple joys of family life. Mornings with Leonardo, teaching him to read and watching his face light up with understanding. Quiet dinners with James, planning weekend trips and laughing at his terrible dad jokes. Bedtime stories where she would tell Leonardo about his brave mama who had faced down dragons and won. The contrast with her former life was stark. The penthouse in Paris had been sold, with the proceeds going to the Chen Foundation. The villa in Tuscany had been converted into a retreat center for trauma survivors. The yacht had been donated to a marine conservation organization. Isabella had kept only what served her new life and her mission. Alessandro and Valentina had faded into well-deserved obscurity. Alessandro had been released after serving 7 years of his sentence. The reduction granted for his cooperation and genuine remorse. Isabella had heard through various sources that he was living quietly in a small town outside Rome, working as a seamstress's assistant and attending regular therapy sessions. He had attempted to contact her several times through intermediaries, always asking for a chance to meet Leonardo. But Isabella had refused. Some bridges, once burned, were never meant to be rebuilt. Valentina remained in prison, her appeals consistently denied. Reports from the correctional facility suggested that she had never accepted responsibility for her actions, instead maintaining that she had been the true victim of a conspiracy between Isabella and Alessandro. She would be eligible for parole in 12 years. Assuming good behavior, something that seemed unlikely given her documented inability to acknowledge her crimes, Isabella rarely thought about either of them anymore. They had served their purpose in her story as catalysts for transformation, but they no longer had any power to affect her emotional state. When journalists asked about forgiveness, she would explain that forgiveness wasn't about the perpetrators, it was about the survivor choosing not to carry the weight of hatred. Forgiveness, she had said in one memorable interview, is not about saying what someone did was okay. It's about saying that what someone did will not define me. As Isabella stood in her office that evening, reviewing plans for the Next Chen Foundation project, a partnership with UNICEF to provide education and protection for girls in conflict zones, Leonardo tugged at her skirt. Mama, when Papa James comes home, can we make pizza? Isabella looked down at her son, this miracle who had survived everything that should have destroyed him before he was even born, and felt the familiar surge of protective love that had driven every decision she had made since that terrible night in Milan. Of course, sweetheart. What kind of pizza do you want to make? The kind with lots of cheese and happiness, Leonardo said seriously. Isabella laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the office. That's my favorite kind too. As if summoned by their conversation, James appeared in the doorway, his medical scrubs traded for jeans and a sweater, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. Did someone say pizza? He asked, scooping Leonardo into his arms and spinning him around. Papa James. Mama said we could make the happiness kind. The happiness kind is definitely the best kind, James agreed, moving to Isabella and wrapping his free arm around her waist. How was your day? Love, productive, Isabella said, leaning into his embrace. The Jakarta Safe House opened this morning. The São Paulo Center graduated its first class of entrepreneurs, and we got approval for the educational grants in Nigeria. And here I thought my day was good because I successfully removed an appendix, James teased. Show off, Isabella smiled, looking out at the glittering city one more time before gathering her things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, new ways to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. But tonight was for family, for laughter, for the simple pleasure of making pizza with the people she loved most. As they prepared to leave the office, Leonardo in James's arms and Isabella gathering her laptop, she caught sight of the small silver frame on her desk. It held a photo from their wedding day, the three of them laughing as they walked along the beach. Leonardo between them with his hands in theirs, the sunset painting everything golden. Next to it was another photo, older and more worn. It showed Isabella and her brother Marcus as children, their arms around each other, huge grins on their faces. Marcus had taken that photo just before she left for the trial, insisting that she remember who she had been before the world tried to tell her who she should be. A strong woman who knew how to love and be loved, he had said. Don't let them take that away from you. She hadn't, despite everything that had been done to her, despite the betrayal and pain and fear. She had held on to the parts of herself that mattered most. And in doing so, she had discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. The elevator descended silently toward the lobby, where their driver waited to take them home to their apartment overlooking Central Park. Leonardo chattered excitedly about pizza toppings, while James planned their weekend trip to the botanical garden. Isabella listened to their voices. These two people who had helped her remember what happiness felt like, and felt grateful for every twist of fate that had led her to this moment. The lobby was nearly empty, just a few security guards and cleaning staff working the evening shift. As they walked toward the exit, Isabella heard someone call her name. Mrs. Chen. She turned to see a young woman, perhaps 25, with nervous eyes and healing bruises on her face. She held an envelope in hands that trembled slightly. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said. I'm Sarah Williams. I've been trying to get an appointment through your foundation, but I know you're busy, and It's no bother at all, Isabella said gently, recognizing the signs of someone who had been told she didn't matter. What can I do for you, Sarah? I have a story, Sarah said, the words tumbling out in a rush. About my ex-husband, about what he did to me and my daughter. I've been trying to get the police to listen, the courts to care, but no one believes me because he's important, rich, connected. Like they were. Sarah gestured vaguely, and Isabella understood she was referring to Alessandro and Valentina. I read your book, Sarah continued. I watched your interviews, and I thought, maybe, if you could help me, people might listen. Because if someone like you, someone successful and strong, if these things could happen to you, then they could happen to anyone, Isabella finished softly. And if I could survive them, so can you. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I just want my daughter to be safe. I want him to stop hurting us. I want someone to believe me. Isabella looked at this woman, this brave, broken, hopeful woman, and saw herself 4 years ago. Desperate, alone, convinced that the world had conspired against her. The difference was that Isabella had had resources, family, connections. Sarah clearly had none of those things. I believe you, Isabella said firmly, and we're going to help you. But right now, I want you to know that you've already done the hardest part. You've chosen to fight. You've chosen to believe that you and your daughter deserve better. That choice, that's where strength begins. Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, writing her personal cell phone number on the back. Call me tomorrow morning. We're going to sit down together, and you're going to tell me everything. And then we're going to make sure your story is heard by people who can do something about it. Sarah stared at the card like it was a lifeline. I can't pay for legal help. I don't have anything to offer in return. The only thing I want in return, Isabella said, is for you to remember this feeling right now. The feeling of knowing that someone believes you, that you're not alone. Because someday, when you're strong enough, I want you to be that person for someone else. Sarah nodded, clutching the card to her chest. Thank you. Thank you so much. As Sarah hurried away, James squeezed Isabella's hand. Another one, he asked gently. Another one, Isabella confirmed, and another chance to prove that no one has to face their dragons alone. Leonardo, who had been listening with the serious attention that children give to adult conversations they don't fully understand, looked up at his mother. Mama, are you going to help that lady fight her dragons? We're going to help her slay them, Isabella said firmly, just like I slayed mine. And then she'll be strong like you. She's already strong, sweetheart. She just needed someone to remind her. As they walked out into the New York evening, the city lights creating a constellation around them, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 4 years ago, she had been destroyed professionally, emotionally, physically. She had been betrayed by the person she trusted most, attacked by someone who saw her as an obstacle to be removed, and written off by a world that found her pain inconvenient. But she had refused to stay down. She had gathered the broken pieces of her life and rebuilt them into something stronger, more beautiful, more meaningful than what had been destroyed. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her trauma into triumph. The statistics were staggering: over 1,000 women, directly helped by the Chen Foundation. 50,000 survivors reached through various programs. Laws changed in 8 countries, and millions of dollars raised for research and support services. But beyond the numbers were the individual stories, women like Sarah, who had found the courage to fight because they had seen that survival was possible, that justice could be achieved, that beauty could emerge from ashes. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, now a federal judge in New York. Saw the news about the Jakarta opening. Proud of you, little sister. Mom and Dad would be too. Their parents had died in a car accident when Isabella was 22, before they could see either of their children achieve their dreams. But Isabella often felt their presence in moments like these, when she was reminded that the values they had instilled, compassion, justice, resilience, had become the foundation of everything she had built. Another text, this one from Sophie Laurent. The documentary crew wants to schedule final interviews next month. Are you ready to tell the whole story? Isabella had agreed to participate in a feature-length documentary about her case and its aftermath. The filmmaker was a woman who specialized in stories about survivors who had become advocates, and she had spent 2 years following Isabella's work with the foundation. The film was scheduled to premiere at Sundance and would later be distributed globally, with proceeds going to organizations supporting acid attack survivors. Ready as I'll ever be, Isabella typed back. Some stories need to be told. The taxi pulled up to their building, a converted warehouse in Tribeca that James had renovated to accommodate both family life and Isabella's need for security. The security measures were discreet but comprehensive, a necessary reality for someone who had received death threats from supporters of Valentina and others who saw Isabella's success as somehow threatening to their worldview. But inside the apartment, life was wonderfully normal. Leonardo immediately ran to his playroom to select toys for bath time, while James opened a bottle of wine and Isabella changed from her business attire into jeans and a sweater. The domesticity of it all, the mundane joy of home and family, was something she never took for granted. Over dinner, they had indeed made pizza, with extra cheese and what Leonardo insisted was a liberal sprinkling of happiness. They talked about their plans for the weekend, Leonardo's upcoming preschool graduation, and James's research into pro bono plastic surgery for burn victims. Dr. Patterson wants to expand the program to include psychological counseling, James said, twirling cheese around his fork. She thinks the physical reconstruction is only half the battle. She's right, Isabella agreed. Trauma lives in the body and the mind. You can't heal one without addressing the other. Like you did, James said softly. Isabella nodded. Like I'm still doing. Healing isn't a destination, it's a practice. After Leonardo was tucked into bed, his room lit by a nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling, Isabella and James sat on their balcony overlooking the Hudson River. The city sparkled around them, alive with possibilities and dreams, and the constant motion of people pursuing their own versions of happiness. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if none of it had occurred? James asked, his arm around Isabella's shoulders. If Alessandro had never betrayed you, if Valentina had never attacked you, Isabella considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. I probably would have had a comfortable life, designer clothes, fancy parties, all the privileges that come with marrying well. But I don't think I would have had a meaningful life. I don't think I would have discovered what I was really capable of. You don't think you would have been happy? I think I would have been content. But contentment and happiness aren't the same thing. Contentment is passive. It's accepting what you're given. Happiness is active. It's building something that reflects your values and your dreams. James was quiet for a moment, processing her words. So you're grateful for what happened. I'm grateful for who I became because of what happened, Isabella clarified. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, and I'd certainly never ask for it again, but I can't deny that it forced me to discover reserves of strength I never knew I had. It taught me that I could survive anything, and more importantly, that survival isn't enough, you have to choose to thrive. As if to emphasize her point, her phone buzzed with a notification from the Chen Foundation's social media account. A woman in Morocco had posted a video of herself walking without crutches for the first time since her husband had pushed her down a flight of stairs 2 years earlier. The Chen Foundation had funded her medical treatment and rehabilitation. Today I took my first steps toward my new life, the woman said in the video, tears streaming down her face. Thank you to Mrs. Chen and everyone who showed me that I deserve to heal. Isabella shared the video on her own account with the caption, Strength recognizes strength. Proud to witness your journey, Fatima. Within minutes, the post had hundreds of likes and comments from other survivors sharing their own stories of recovery and renewal. Isabella read through them all, as she always did, because she knew that for many of these women, being seen and acknowledged was as important as any financial assistance they might receive. How do you do it? James asked, watching her respond to comment after comment. How do you carry all of their pain and still stay positive? I don't carry their pain, Isabella said thoughtfully. I witness it, I honor it, and I help them transform it. But I learned a long time ago that I can't heal from trauma by absorbing more trauma. I can only heal by choosing hope, over and over again, even when hope seems impossible. One of the comments caught her attention. Mrs. Chen, I'm starting college next month, thanks to the scholarship from your foundation. I'm going to study law so I can help other women like us. Thank you for showing me that our stories don't have to end with what was done to us. Isabella smiled, thinking of all the young women who had turned their pain into purpose, their survival into service. The ripple effects of her work extended far beyond what she could measure or track. Every woman who found the courage to leave an abusive situation, every girl who stayed in school instead of accepting child marriage, every survivor who chose to speak truth to power, they were all part of a growing movement that refused to accept that violence against women was inevitable or acceptable. "I have something for you," James said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." He handed her a small wrapped package, about the size of a jewelry box. Isabella looked at him curiously. It wasn't their anniversary, her birthday, or any other special occasion she could think of. "What's this for?" "For being you," James said simply. "For choosing to build something beautiful instead of something bitter. For teaching Leonardo that strength comes from kindness, not cruelty. For showing me what real love looks like." Isabella unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small silver frame containing a photo she had never seen before. It showed her speaking at the podium during her UN address, but the photographer had captured a moment when she had looked down at the audience and smiled, not the practiced smile of a public figure, but the genuine expression of someone who had found her purpose. "When was this taken?" she asked, studying the image. "6 months ago, when you addressed the General Assembly about economic empowerment for survivors. The photographer is a friend of mine. He donated this print to me because he said it captured something special." Isabella looked more closely at the photo. In the audience, she could see faces of all ages and backgrounds: diplomats, activists, survivors, world leaders, all united in their attention to her words. But what struck her most was her own expression: confident, purposeful, radiant with the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." "There's an inscription on the back," James said. Isabella turned the frame over and read the elegant script. "She believed she could, so she did. With love and admiration. From your family." "James," Isabella's voice caught in her throat. "I wanted you to have something that captured this moment in your life," he explained. "Not the trials or the trauma, but the triumph. The woman you became because you refused to let anyone else write your ending." Isabella set the frame carefully on the small table beside her chair, next to a stack of children's books and a succulent plant that Leonardo had given her for Mother's Day. It was perfect there, among the simple treasures of their daily life. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of New Jersey twinkle across the water. A helicopter passed overhead, its spotlight briefly illuminating the water's surface, and Isabella was reminded of all the nights she had sat alone in various hotel rooms and safe houses, wondering if she would ever feel safe or happy again. The journey from that terrified, betrayed woman to this moment had not been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the weight of everyone's expectations felt crushing. The media attention, while largely positive, had also brought scrutiny of every decision she made. Critics questioned whether she was exploiting her own trauma for fame and fortune. Others suggested that her success somehow invalidated the experiences of survivors who hadn't achieved similar public recognition. Isabella had learned to navigate these challenges with grace, understanding that her visibility made her a lightning rod for all kinds of projections and assumptions. She had developed thick skin for criticism while maintaining an open heart for genuine connection and feedback. "I got a letter today," she said suddenly, remembering the envelope that had been waiting on her desk when she returned from lunch. "From a law student in Bangladesh. She's writing her thesis on international frameworks for protecting acid attack survivors." "That's wonderful. Are you going to help her?" "I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to recommend her for the Chen Foundation Fellowship Program. If her research is as promising as it sounds, we'll fund her to spend a year developing policy recommendations for the UN." This was how Isabella's influence had grown, not through grand gestures or publicity stunts, but through identifying and nurturing emerging leaders who shared her commitment to justice. The Chen Foundation's fellowship program had supported over 200 young activists, lawyers, doctors, and social workers around the world, creating a network of change-makers who were carrying the mission forward in their own communities. Speaking of the fellowship program, James said, "Didn't you say Marcus was announcing the new judicial fellowship next week?" Isabella nodded. Her brother had worked with her to establish a program that would place domestic violence survivors who had gone to law school and clerkships with federal judges. The goal was to ensure that the legal system included voices of people who understood trauma and survival from personal experience. "The first class starts in September," Isabella said. "5 women, all survivors, all brilliant. One of them argued her own case pro se and won. Another founded a legal aid clinic in her garage. They're going to change the legal system from the inside." "Like you changed the fashion industry," Isabella smiled. "I hope they're more successful than I was." The fashion industry is still largely built on exploitation of workers, of natural resources, of women's insecurities. I managed to carve out one ethical space within it, but systemic change is going to take a lot more than one company. This was something Isabella thought about often, the tension between individual success and systemic change. Her personal triumph was undeniable, but she was always aware that for every Isabella Chen who had the resources and support to fight back, there were thousands of women who suffered in silence because they lacked access to justice. The Chen Foundation's work was designed to address this inequality, providing not just direct services to survivors, but also advocacy for policy changes that would protect all women. Isabella had testified before Congress, the European Parliament, and the UN about the need for stronger international cooperation in prosecuting gender-based violence. She had lobbied for changes in laws governing domestic violence, stalking, and acid attacks. The results had been tangible. 12 countries had strengthened their laws regarding acid sales and possession in the 5 years since Isabella's case gained international attention. The Chen Protocol, a set of best practices for supporting acid attack survivors, had been adopted by hospitals in 30 countries, and the International Criminal Court had agreed to prioritize prosecution of gender-based violence cases, partly due to Isabella's advocacy. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Isabella said, leaning back against James's shoulder. "I think about Valentina." James tensed slightly. "In what way?" "I wonder if she ever thinks about the women she could have helped instead of hurt. She was beautiful, charismatic, intelligent. She could have used those gifts to build something meaningful. Instead, she chose destruction." "Do you pity her?" Isabella considered the question carefully. "I pity the choices she made. I pity whatever happened to her that made her believe hurting others was the path to happiness. But I don't pity her circumstances. Now those are the natural consequences of her actions." "Have you ever been tempted to visit her to confront her?" "No," Isabella said firmly. "That chapter of my life is closed. Seeing her again wouldn't serve any purpose except satisfying curiosity, and I have better things to do with my time." This was true, though Isabella had to admit that she sometimes wondered what Valentina thought when she heard about Isabella's success. Did she feel any remorse? Did she understand the magnitude of what she had lost through her choices? Or was she still consumed by the same jealousy and entitlement that had driven her to violence? These questions were ultimately irrelevant. Isabella knew Valentina's inner life was her own responsibility. Isabella's focus had to remain on the future, on Leonardo's happiness, on James's research, on the next woman who would need help escaping danger. "Mama," a small voice called from inside the apartment. Isabella and James looked at each other and smiled. Leonardo was supposed to be asleep, but he had developed a habit of calling for his mother when he couldn't settle down. "I'll go," James said, starting to stand. "No, let me," Isabella said. "He might be having the dream again." Leonardo had recently started having nightmares about bad people hurting his mama. The child psychologist they consulted had assured them this was normal. Children often process their parents' trauma through play and dreams, even when they hadn't directly experienced the events themselves. The key was to provide reassurance without going into details that might be frightening. Isabella found Leonardo sitting up in bed, his hair tousled and his favorite stuffed elephant clutched in his arms. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "I had the scary dream again," he said, reaching for her. "The one where the mean lady tried to hurt you." Isabella sat on the edge of his bed and pulled him into her lap. "Tell me about the dream." "There was a lady with yellow hair and she was really mad, and she tried to hurt you, but you were too strong. And then you became a superhero, and you helped all the other mamas who were scared." Isabella smiled despite the seriousness of the conversation. Even in his dreams, Leonardo understood her story not as one of victimization, but of empowerment. "Do you know what I think?" she said, smoothing his hair. "I think that dream is actually telling you something important. Do you want to know what it is?" Leonardo nodded solemnly. "It's telling you that even when bad things happen, good people can choose to help each other. And it's telling you that your mama is safe now, and strong, and surrounded by people who love her. Like Papa James, like Papa James, and like Uncle Marcus, and like you, my brave boy." "Am I brave like you, Mama?" Isabella looked into her son's earnest face, this child who had survived his mother's trauma in utero, who was growing up surrounded by stories of resilience and justice, who instinctively understood that strength came from helping others rather than hurting them. "You're braver than me," she said honestly, "because you get to grow up knowing that the world has good people in it who fight for what's right. I had to learn that the hard way." Leonardo considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important conversations. "When I grow up, I want to help people too," he said. "Like you do." "I think you'll be wonderful at helping people," Isabella said. "But remember, there are lots of ways to help. You could be a doctor like Papa James, or a lawyer like Uncle Marcus, or a teacher, or a scientist, or anything else that makes you happy. The important thing is to be kind and brave." "Will you tell me the story about the phoenix again?" This had become their bedtime ritual. Isabella would tell Leonardo a simplified version of the myth of the phoenix, the magical bird that rose from its own ashes, stronger and more beautiful than before. She had adapted the story for a preschooler, focusing on themes of renewal and hope rather than destruction and death. "Once upon a time," Isabella began, "there was a beautiful bird with feathers that shimmered like jewels. The bird lived in a peaceful forest where it sang songs that made all the other animals happy. But one day, a terrible storm came." As she told the familiar story, Isabella felt Leonardo's breathing slow and deepen. By the time she reached the part where the phoenix emerged from the ashes with new powers to heal and protect, he was fast asleep against her shoulder. She tucked him back into bed, kissed his forehead, and stood watching him for a moment in the soft glow of his nightlight. This child, this perfect, innocent, hopeful child was the real victory. He would grow up knowing he was loved, knowing his mother was strong, knowing that justice was possible even in a world that often seemed cruel. When she returned to the balcony, James had opened a second bottle of wine and was reading something on his tablet. "Everything okay? The dream again." But he settled down quickly. "He told me he wants to help people when he grows up." James smiled. "I'm not surprised. He's been watching his mother change the world since he was born." "I hope we're raising him right," Isabella said, settling back into her chair. "I want him to be confident but not entitled, strong but not cruel, aware of injustice but not cynical about human nature. Judging by the kid who just told his stuffed elephant that they needed to be brave helpers like Mama, I think we're doing fine," Isabella laughed. "He said that while you were tucking him in. Also, apparently the elephant is going to be a doctor when it grows up, because doctors help people feel better, and that's important work." The love Isabella felt for her small family was so intense it was almost painful. After years of believing she was unlovable, of having her trust betrayed so completely, she had somehow found her way to this, to love without conditions, to partnership without manipulation, to happiness without fear. "I got some news today that I haven't shared yet," Isabella said, suddenly remembering the phone call she had received just before leaving the office. Good news or challenging news? Good news, the European Union wants to establish an International Day of Solidarity with acid attack survivors. They want me to speak at the inaugural ceremony in Brussels. James raised his wine glass in a toast. To my wife, who continues to amaze me with her ability to turn personal pain into global progress. Isabella clinked her glass against his. To my husband, who reminds me every day that love doesn't have to hurt. They drank in comfortable silence, watching a barge make its way slowly up the Hudson River, its lights reflected in the dark water like fallen stars. Can I ask you something? James said eventually. Always. Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life before all the responsibility, the public attention, the constant awareness of how much suffering there is in the world? Isabella considered the question seriously. I miss the innocence, she said finally. I miss believing that the world was fundamentally fair, that love conquers all, that bad things only happen to other people. But I don't miss the passivity. I don't miss feeling like my life was something that happened to me rather than something I was actively creating. And you don't miss being just Isabella, without all the titles and expectations. I am just Isabella, she said with a smile. The titles are just descriptions of what Isabella chooses to do with her time. CEO, activist, survivor, mother. Wife, they're all me, but they're not all of me. A notification on her phone reminded her that she had an early morning meeting with the documentary crew. The film about her story was nearly complete, and tomorrow they would be recording her final interview, a reflection on the 5 years since the attack and her hopes for the future. What will you tell them? James asked, noticing her checking the reminder. The truth, Isabella said simply. That trauma doesn't have to be the end of your story. That justice is possible, but it requires people willing to fight for it. That healing happens not when you forget what hurt you, but when you transform it into something that helps others. And what about your hopes for the future? Isabella looked out at the city spreading endlessly in all directions, full of people pursuing their dreams, struggling with their challenges, searching for meaning and connection. I hope that someday, stories like mine will be unnecessary, she said. I hope that we'll build a world where women don't have to become warriors just to survive. But until that world exists, I hope that every woman who needs to fight knows that she's not alone. As if summoned by her words, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Williams, the young woman they had met in the lobby earlier that evening. Mrs. Chen, thank you for believing me. I called the number you gave me and spoke to your associate, Miss Rodriguez. She's going to help me file a restraining order tomorrow, and she's connecting me with a safe house for me and my daughter. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I might actually be free. I don't know how to thank you. Isabella showed the message to James, who shook his head in amazement. How many is that this month? Sarah makes 12 direct interventions, but that doesn't count the women we've helped through partner organizations or the ones who've been inspired by the advocacy work. 12 families saved from violence. 12 women who will get the chance to rebuild their lives. 12 children who will grow up safer because their mothers found the courage to leave. Isabella nodded, but she was already thinking about tomorrow's schedule. Sarah would need legal representation, financial support while she established independence, and probably counseling to process the trauma she had endured. Her daughter would need childcare while Sarah looked for work, and possibly therapy to deal with whatever she had witnessed at home. The Chen Foundation had protocols for all of this, systems developed through years of experience helping women escape dangerous situations. But each case was also unique, requiring individualized attention and care. I should probably get some sleep, Isabella said, stifling a yawn. Tomorrow is going to be intense. As they gathered their wine glasses and prepared to go inside, Isabella took one last look at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Sarah Williams was probably lying awake, planning her escape, marshaling her courage for the fight ahead. In a few hours, she would walk into a lawyer's office with her head held high, ready to reclaim her life, and somewhere else. Another woman was probably discovering her husband's betrayal, or facing down her abuser, or making the decision to speak truth to power despite the cost. She might not know it yet, but she wasn't alone. There was a network of survivors and advocates and allies ready to catch her when she fell and help her stand when she was ready to fight. This was Isabella's true legacy, not the company she had built or the awards she had won, but the ecosystem of support she had helped create for women who needed to know that survival was possible, that justice was achievable, that their stories didn't have to end with what had been done to them. As she turned off the lights and checked on Leonardo one last time, Isabella felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived in alignment with one's values. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, new chances to prove that love was stronger than hate, that truth was more powerful than lies, that hope could triumph over even the darkest despair. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had survived, thrived, and found her way home to love. And that was enough. That was everything. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, spread her wings and learned to fly, and she was never coming down again.